Well, that then bringing you up to date with all the world headlines. Time now for business. Yuka is back again. Hi to you, Yuka.
Hi, Rochelle.
We're kicking off with Google is threatening to pull its search engine from the Australian internet. Talk us through why they've made that threat.
The tech giant is pushing back against a proposed law in Australia that would force it and other internet companies to pay Australian media outlets to display their news content in search results. Last week, Google confirmed that it had blocked certain Australia news sites for a small number of users. Although Australia is a relatively small market for Google that relies on advertising, the company says that the law would set a bad precedent. It is the dominant search engine for Australian internet users. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his government won't respond to threats. Andrew Hillier has more.
An ultimatum in the ongoing tug-of-war between Google and the Australian government. Google's threat to disable its search engine has upped the stakes as the battle lines are drawn over Australia's plan to make it pay for listing content by news publishers.
In its current form, the code remains unworkable, and if it became law, would hurt not just Google but small publishers, small businesses and the millions of Australians that use our services every day.
The company argues the legislation would ruin its business model and undermines the principle of a free and open internet, a stance shared by Facebook, which also stands to lose money if the law is passed. The plans followed a 12-month review by Australia's competition regulator that accused the tech giants of hoarding a disproportionate share of online advertising revenue. Google's threat didn't go down well with the Australian Prime Minister, who said it was up to lawmakers to make the rules.
Australia makes our rules for things you can do in Australia. That's done in our parliament, it's done by our government, but we don't respond to threats.
The plans could give Australia's struggling news outlets a desperately needed lifeline. For years, the sector has suffered from plunging revenues. Last year, the federal government set up a fund to help regional media make up for the shortfall in advertising.
Well, turning to the United States, the Senate Finance Committee has approved President Biden's nomination of Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. The vote was unanimous, with 26 for and 0 against. The full Senate vote will come later. And now, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Yellen is to become the first woman to head the U.S. Treasury. Back in 2017, it took 3 weeks for her predecessor, Steven Mnuchin, to be confirmed on a 53-47 vote divided along the party line. Now, Senate Republicans did express concerns about the new president's spending plans and called on Yellen to work with them in developing economic policies. Republicans are worried that Biden's $1.9 trillion pandemic relief, as well as other investment plans for infrastructure and green energy, will drive up national debt further. But Yellen has warned that without a swift coronavirus relief, the US will face a longer and more painful recession. The president is signing 2 executive orders today, one on raising the minimum wage and another on speeding up giving food aid and other economic aid to those who most need it. Here's Joe Biden's economic advisor, Brian Deese, speaking earlier.
The American people are hurting and they can't afford to wait. They need help right now. And that's the motivation behind the actions that the president will take today. I want to be very clear. These actions are not a substitute for comprehensive legislative relief, but they will provide a critical lifeline to millions of families.
Well, we saw that President Biden was just signing those executive orders. As we can see here, these are live images coming in. As I said, he's signing 2 executive orders, one on raising the minimum wage and the other on speeding up relief to those millions of families that most need economic aid at this hour.
Our administration up and running. I want to thank
Well, the new U.S. administration is also set to maintain a tough stance on China as it looks to rework on international trade. After 2 years of trade war, the 2 sides signed a partial trade agreement a year ago. As part of the Phase 1 deal, Beijing agreed to buy at least $200 billion worth more in U.S. goods and services over 2 years. But Chinese customs data show that the Asian giant is falling well short of that pledge. In 2020, it's estimated to have bought $100 billion worth of US goods, less than 60% of the target set for that year. Now, despite the deal, US trade deficit with China has continued to increase, particularly since the pandemic. Now, with that, let's check in on the day's trading action. And on Wall Street, optimism of earlier in the week seems to have faded somewhat as investors in the US are indeed worried that Joe Biden's coronavirus relief plan may hit a stumbling block in Congress. And it's a vote of confidence in the UK, according to the British Prime Minister. Boris Johnson hailed the decision by Japanese car maker Nissan to keep making cars at its Sunderland plant in the UK. The decision comes as a result of the trade deal reached between the UK and the European Union at the end of last year. Nissan makes about 30,000 Leaf electric cars there and says it will source more batteries from Britain to avoid tariffs. It's a vital economic engine in the town northeastern England. Here's what the head of the local Chamber of Commerce had to say.
There are 6,000 to 7,000 people at any one time employed full-time at the plant itself, and many times that, sort of 35,000, 40,000 in the supply chain. But the impact that the Nissan plant has had throughout the Northeast is absolutely incredible and not really possible to overstate. So many businesses outside the automotive supply chain directly have benefited from the impact of the expertise that this plant has brought. And we know that the longer term future of this whole region does really get impacted by what happens at the Nissan plant here.
And finally from me, one of the most popular chewy sweets here in France called Caramba may disappear from store shelves soon because of an ongoing strike at its only manufacturing plant in the north of the country. And now only 16 tonnes of Caramba were produced last week compared to 100 million tonnes in normal times. Now workers there say that they're protesting at the closure of the plant to relocate production to a nearby factory. Unions say that move will cause a salary decrease of up to 25%. The company says it's in the middle of negotiations. The worker protests have been going on and off since November, and with reduced production capacity now, shops might run out of stock very soon, they say.
It'll be very bad news.
It'll be very bad news for our children.
Absolutely. and some of the parents who also like Caramba. Thank you very much, Yuka, for our roundup of the business news. Do stay with us here on France 24. We'll be back with more international headlines.
France 24, c'est la